Hi, everyone, and welcome to the All It Takes to Goal podcast, the best place in the entire world, including all of Canada, to learn how to build new thoughts, new actions, and new results. I'm your host, John Acuff, and today I'm joined by Dr. Meg Meeker. Who's that? I'm so glad you asked. Dr. Meg Meeker is a pediatrician who has practiced child and adolescent medicine for 33 years and is an author of 6 best-selling books, including Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters, Strong Mothers, Strong Sons, The 10 Habits of Happy Mothers, and more. She is a nationally acclaimed speaker on parenting issues and has appeared on numerous television shows, including The Today Show, NPR, Today with Kathy Lee and Hoda, Dateline NBC, The Anger Mangle, Fox and Friends, and The Dave Ramsey Show, among many others. She has spoken at the United Nations, that's the UN if you want to be briefer, on the topic of fathers, and she serves on the advisory board at the Medical Institute. Dr. Meg's podcast, Dr. Meg, I feel like I said Dr. Med there. That's not her name. Her name is Dr. Meg. Dr. Meg's podcast, Parenting Great Kids, has reached over 7 million listeners across the globe. I was a guest on it. It's a great podcast. She has created many online courses to help parents. She's also the mother of 4 grown children and a grandmother to 5. She's been married to her husband, Walt, with whom she shares a medical practice for almost 40 years. And we've known each other for about 12 years now. We did some events together 12 years ago. That's where we first met each other. So it's always fun to have a friend on the show. I can't wait for you to hear this episode. But first, a quick message from the sponsor of today's episode. Every year, I set crazy big goals. And every year, there's one productivity tool that I use to help me reach them, the Finish Calendar. I've been using it for over a decade, and it's helped me crush goals like running 1,000 miles in a year, growing my business, and writing a New York Times bestselling book. Thousands of people have bought them over the years too. Why? Because it works. It's not magic, it's science. Study after study has shown how important tracking your year is. But my favorite came from the University of Konstanz in Germany. They showed that when you track when and where you're going to work on something, you double your chances of success. Let me say that again. You double your chances of success. This calendar is massive. It's beautiful, it's motivational, and it comes in paper or dry erase. On top of all the other amazing features, you can choose to display it vertically or horizontally because this bad boy is also double-sided. If you've got a big goal or a lot of big goals, grab a Finish Calendar today at finishcalendar.com. Once again, that's finishcalendar.com. All right, let's jump right into my interview with Dr. Meg Meeker. Dr. Meg, I'm so glad you're here with me. We've known each other for, I think it's more than 12 years. I think it's more than 12 years, which is a dozen in some languages. So I'm excited you're here. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me, John.
I like to start with some kind of rapid fire questions to kind of ease into it, because I find that sometimes on podcasts, I immediately go into like a really serious question about somebody's book or their movie or whatever. So I'm going to start a little lighthearted. First question, what's the worst gift you've given somebody?
The worst gift I've given somebody. I think it was a bunch of Scotch tape, like a huge roll of Scotch tape, because they were a little bit disorganized and needed a little bit of help, and that wasn't taken very well. So that's a pretty bad gift.
You gave somebody like a 6-pack of tape as a gift.
Yes,
that's
tape,
pretty good.
Of tape, yeah. And when you give somebody something like that, they take it personally. Like, what do you think is wrong with me that I need this tape?
That's funny.
And clearly I had to backpedal from that one.
That's pretty funny. I gave my wife snowshoes, which is a bad gift because 1, she hates the cold. And 2, I gave her 1 pair of snowshoes. I didn't buy us both snowshoes. So I was essentially like, why don't you go walk out in the woods alone? Which is not
leave me alone.
Yeah, exactly. That was year 2 of our marriage. Yeah. So I've gotten better, but that was a bad gift. Okay. Second question. What's one of your favorite movies? Like what's one, a movie that you can either watch again and again and again, or one that you still remember the first time you saw it?
Oh my. I love Victor Hugo's Les Mis. Love it. I've seen it and Chariots of Fire.
Chariots of Fire. Those are both great. I was going to say Good Will Hunting. I'm a big fan of Good Will Hunting. That's probably on my,
a good one. Yep.
That's probably on my list. And then last question, what's the first car you ever drove?
Now, this is going to crack you up. I had a 3/4 ton Chevy pickup truck that was manual. It had a stick shift that was probably 3 feet long. And here was this little kid going off to college driving this big, huge truck. And when you put it in 4-wheel drive, you had to get out of the car and you had to turn the things on the wheels to let the 4-wheel drive engage. I loved that car.
That's where did you grow up that you were going off to college in a rig? Like, were you from Saskatchewan? Is this a Saskatchewan reference? No. What do we got going on here?
It felt so good. No, I grew up outside of Boston in a very historic place called Concord, Mass, which is now very sort of she. I left there.
Sudbury, Lexington, Concord. That's fancy.
Very fancy. But when I grew up, it wasn't as fancy. There were a lot of people who had horses, and we did a lot of work in the fields. We, pulled horse trailers. We picked up hay bales in the fields. And I just loved that. And I had a lot of work to do around the barn. And so that's the first car I asked for. And my dad was thrilled. And he said, there you go. So I drove off to college, all women's college in Western Mass in my pickup truck.
Where did you go to college?
Mount Holyoke College. It was all women.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you've received advanced degrees after that. Give us the,
correct,
this is my path.
The list. Okay. So after I graduated Mount Holyoke College, I went to Cincinnati, Ohio, and went to University of Cincinnati College of Medicine, during which time I had a baby. My husband and I got married after 6 months of knowing each other, had a baby, went and started residency in Children's Hospital of Wisconsin as a pediatric resident, but we had a baby. So my husband actually stayed home for almost 4 years with our daughter. And I thought, well, you're home. That means I can just keep getting pregnant and hand you a baby. Yeah. So by the time I finished, I was pregnant with our third. And then he did his training back outside of Boston, and I stayed home with the kids.
I love that.
So that was,
a real give and take, a real balance. And you mentioned a daughter. That's how I first found out about you, was some of your work about strong daughters, strong fathers. So what inspired you to go down that path of research, that path of work? Because there weren't 1,000 options on that topic when you wrote it. This was in my opinion, one of the first books that really said, okay, I'm going to focus on this. What made you want to focus on that relationship?
Well, it really came from my practice. When I was, working in my practice as a pediatrician, which I still do, I never thought about writing a book. But what I saw happening in my practice versus what was happening in the culture, there was an enormous disconnect. For instance, I saw that girls in my practice, I took care of high-risk girls, wealthy girls who were doing fine. But the girls who did the best emotionally, intellectually, even physically, I guess, were the ones who had dads that were engaged. I mean, not PhD in psychology engaged, but, just engaged enough. And I also saw at the same time dads being dumbed down in the culture through television and videos. Wait a minute. We're sort of bashing our dads, but kids need them, daughters in particular. I had a very good dad, very inspirational to me. My husband did a great job with our 3 daughters, and we have a son who's our youngest. And I really felt somebody needed to move into that area and change the paradigm. I wanted dads to see how their daughters see them, because I felt if they could see what their daughters see and want from them, that might ignite them to say, hey, I'll move in closer to my daughter. And after I did that, the book just hit. And I was very surprised, because I just sort of did it out of my heart thinking, we got to do something for our dads here. And I'm still doing my encouraging dad work. So.
Yeah. And dads still need it. I think that was for me. I had young daughters at the time I read it. and it resonated with me. What would you say? So there's some dads listening, or there's some wives listening that might go, or some moms listening that might go, oh, that's really surprising. What are some of the surprises that dads don't understand? So you said, okay, if I could get dads to understand how their daughters looked at them, what would be some of the things that when you talk to a dad and go, or a group of dads, because you're a speaker, you travel around the country speaking around a variety of topics, but what are the things that when you say, hey, here's 3 things dads don't know that make them go, oh, I had no idea?
Yeah. The first one is that you're the most important man in her life. And dads gasp when I say that. No, it's a teacher, it's a coach, it's a boyfriend, it's a grandfather. I said, no, because you're the one that teaches your daughter what to expect from men and how to relate to men. Second is that she looks up to you as larger than life. You're really her hero in a lot of ways. Again, dads go, what are you talking about? I'm no hero. I said, to your daughter, she's little and she looks up to you as the one who's going to take care of her and protect her and nurture her and, watch over her. She doesn't see her mother that way. Now, I know that's going to make a lot of mothers mad. It isn't better. It isn't worse. But daughters see their dads very differently from how they see their mothers. And also, to be a great dad is pretty simple. But the simple things are very hard. Show up, show her some affection, and give her attention and affirm her. Any dad can do that. Any dad can do that. But dads make father life so much more complicated because I think you guys compare yourselves to what your guy friends are doing. Or you go, gee whiz, my daughter won't do that for me, or she won't talk to that, to me. Skip all that. Just skip all that and focus on doing 3 or 4 things and you're there. That's it. You don't have to be a perfect dad. You can still drive a really ugly car. You can only have 1 car. You don't need a fancy house. She doesn't need all her great clothes. Give her those 3 things and she's off and flying. And those are the things that my dad gave me and my husband I saw give our daughters.
When you think about the research that informs this, because I think that's one of the most powerful parts of the book, is that there's a lot of emotion in how you write. There's a lot of honesty. There's a lot of relatability. There's a lot of those personal connections. But there's also, hey, I'm a doctor. Hey, here's the research, which I love because there's a ton of books on the market that one person has one experience and then goes, this is how it is for everybody. And you go, no, that was how it was for you. You haven't you didn't go to medical school. Like you haven't seen 1,000 daughters and 1,000 dads. So from a research perspective, what are some of the stats or the data that you go, oh, okay. So like, you like what I said about you got to affirm, you've got to, be encouraging, you got to be present. That's all great. It's a soft skill. You're working on it. Awesome. But by the way, data, like hit us with some numbers, Dr. Meg.
Yeah, exactly. We now know that, some of this is amazing. If a dad starts reading to his daughter with her on her lap, just reading to her when she's 6 months of age, and they test her IQ when she's 3 years old, her IQ is measurably higher than girls whose dads didn't read to them. Believe it or not, girls who have a dad in the home start their menstrual cycles later than girls whose dads are in the home. Girls who have a dad in the home. Again, I don't want your listeners to think these are great dads who understand and talk and all this kind of stuff. A dad in the home, much more likely to go on to college and to graduate school, much less likely to get involved in sex, drugs, and alcohol, much less likely to be poor, much more likely to have a higher self-esteem and less likely to, struggle with depression, anxiety across all levels in a daughter's life. If they have a dad in the home, they fare much better. As a matter of fact, you can't find one area in a girl's life where she fares less well when her dad is in the home, unless, of course, dad is very abusive.
Sure.
But bottom line is, as ridiculous as this sounds, symbols, dads are great for daughters, even just regular dads who are in the home, not doing a whole lot, but having their presence in the home changes a girl's future.
I love that. And I love that you're saying too, okay, we're not saying you have to, we're talking about a super dad that gets up at 4 a.m. and does an hour-long Bible study with his daughter, and then he whittles her a rocking chair from a piece of wood he carved. Like, you're not saying perfect dads. I want to shift for a second and go, okay, I'm a dad who I've got a 16-year-old and I'm listening to this and I'm like, oh no, I should have started reading when she was like a fetus. Like, I'm already behind. Like, because I know there's a lot of parents that feel behind. That's a very common feeling for parents. So if I'm a mom or a dad, I'm a parent in general that goes, because you also talk to moms. You also have a lot of advice and wisdom for moms. What do I do if I've got a 16-year-old? It hasn't been terrible. It hasn't been great. It's just kind of been, and I can see the edge of college coming and I feel behind. What do you say to a parent like that? Because I think you have great feedback for them to, and it gives you some tactical things you can do now at this stage with your kids. Or maybe you got a 25-year-old. Give us like, I feel behind. What do I do?
Yeah, great question. Well, first of all, your child isn't completely an adult, we know now, until they're in their early 20s or around 25. So here's the good news. If you're not close to your 16-year-old, you have 9 more years to make it happen.
That's great.
That's good news, bad news. But here's the other very, very important thing. I hear this all the time from dads. You know what? I blew it. My daughter's 30. It's too late. And I always tell dads this. Every woman takes one man to her grave, and it's her dad. So just like men, how many adult middle-aged men do you know, John, who are running around still trying to get the approval from their dads? A lot of times it's subconscious, but dads have a power in your life. So many middle-aged women and older women are still profoundly impacted by the relationship with their father. In other words, it's never too late for a dad to grow closer to his daughter and to have a better relationship, because until she dies, she always wants more from her dad, more healing or more time and love from him. And that never, ever goes away. So age doesn't really matter in a daughter.
That's so helpful. And you're right. I know men in their late 40s who are still, and they might not even know this, but they're still trying to get their approval of the dad. And sometimes the dad has passed away. Sometimes the dad is no longer alive, and they're still, a dad set up a negative soundtrack, what I'd call, like, and when they were young, and they're still trying to, and it doesn't matter the money, it doesn't matter the size of the house, the size of the yacht, whatever, there's still that sense of chasing. I know there's a lot of moms that are listening right now, and you've also done research writing around the idea of, okay, what's a mom's role or impact with a son? So for the mom listening, that's maybe like, okay, well, that's for the dads. What do you try to encourage moms about when it comes to how they raise sons?
Well, I did write a book, Strong Mothers, Strong Sons, because mothers have a big impact on their sons as well. The relationship a parent has, particularly a mother with a son, is very different from the relationship she has with a daughter. Boys in the first 7 years of life, moms it. They feel security in their mothers. They spend more time with their mothers. But then once they transition into puberty and then into teen years, dad's it. And during the teen years, this is one of the biggest mistakes modern mothers make, is that we need to help our sons transition from boys into men. And in order for them to do that, they need to sort of emotionally separate from us. They don't need to go completely away. But a 15, 16, 17-year-old boy who still feels he depends on his mom, it feels kind of creepy. So mothers need to sort of back out a little bit. And if dad is around and he's a pretty good dad, to let the son bond more with the dad. Very hard for mothers because we're kind of control freaks. Forever, never, never. But we need to let our sons go. And once we let our sons go and look to them as men, never forget my 18-year-old son looking down at me one time. He's very, very tall. And he said, Mom, quit treating me like there's something wrong with me. I'm not a boy. I'm a man. And I realized my need to be able to do something for him or fix him or mom him. He hated it. And so I said, thank you. And I called him man from then on. And I stopped sort of micromanaging him and I backed off. Then a son can become a man. But mothers these days, we're told we need to be our kids everything. And particularly single moms feel like we need to be our sons everything because there's not a man in his life. So we go way overboard. We overparent, we helicopter, and we never stop. And that doesn't do well for boys. That's one of the most important things that mothers need to recognize about psychological development of their sons is that they need to back away in order for there to be that level of maturity.
So let's talk about like a practical or tactical way to do that, because I think one of the hardest things as a parent is watching your kid make life harder than it needs to be because they need to learn the decision. Like I can't, I had a friend the other day and we were talking about this and he said, I wish my 16-year-old, had his act together more. And I said, well, when did you get your act together? When did you get detailed and disciplined? He said, about 32. And I said, well, so it took you 16 extra years. No offense. Even if you're an amazing parent, maybe you shaved off a year for the kid. So how do we, in a tactical way, we're watching our kids, maybe they're making mistakes, but they're mistakes they need to make because if we rush in and fix them, they don't get the lesson and they don't get to grow into the people they're meant to grow into. How do we as parents, because I'm a control freak. I wouldn't have said that earlier. I very much am. How do we, in a tactical way, pull back when there's situations like that?
Well, I think you need to look at every single situation. And if the child or if your son failing isn't going to bring consequences that are disastrous, like, letting him go to a party and drink with his friends and drive home, you go, well, he's got to learn sometime. No, that's too hard of a lesson. But if he's not doing well in soccer and he's not a very good soccer player, let him figure it out. Don't stand on the sidelines going, you can do it, you can score a goal. Maybe he can't, maybe he's terrible, but let him figure that out. Don't do homework for your kids. Let them get a C or an F. Because think about all the great leaders and really strong leadership skills come from having failed and getting up again over and over and over. Those who never fail never really succeed because they haven't had to sort of grab that internal fortitude and say, let's go here. So look at opportunities. This is really hard as a parent where your kid could get rejected. Don't tell him what to do with a girlfriend. If the girlfriend breaks up with him, he's going to learn something. Don't go in there and try to salvage the relationship. Don't do him, as homework for him, particularly when he's young. Don't get that extra coach for his soccer or whatever. Just let him fall and be. And it's very painful to watch. It's very painful, but you have to do it in order for him to grow and to be a strong man. But again, you don't want to allow him to make mistakes that are going to have devastating consequences.
Yeah, so it's really about the size of the situation and the consequences of the situation.
It is. And if the consequences aren't going to be devastating, back off. Let him go. Let him go. Let him have that friend as long as his friend isn't going to take him down a really bad path. Let him have that girlfriend unless she's going to, be horrible to him or whatever. But it's still hard. It's still hard, John, for me to do this with my son. And then it all comes back around again when you have a grandkids. You start all over again. And I've got to say, back off the control. The good thing with grandkids is that your own kids step in and say, back off, mom. You're driving me nuts. So I do.
That's good. That's good. Well, one thing I know a lot of the parents listening to this today have questions about is screen time. So there's, whether it's video games, whether it's Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, what's your take on how much screen time is good for kids? What's too much? How do you manage that situation? Because I think there's a lot of parents that are needing to raise a kid amongst a lot of different challenges when it comes from their digital lifestyle. I know for me, I was super self-righteous and super naive and was like, my kid won't get a phone till they're 16 or 17. And then one day my wife said, it's a shame that she doesn't have a phone because she's the only one in her small group that doesn't have one. And she missed all the encouraging texts they'd send each other all week. And I was excluding her from, like, I had a wholly negative view of social media and phones. And I realized, she's missing part of life because of my old school attitude. How do you enter that conversation with parents?
Yeah. Well, we're making strides. Cell phones are always going to be here. Internet is always going to be here. Our kids are always going to have, bad things come at them. First of all, there's these really, really wonderful devices called a Gab phone or Gizmo. I think it's called Gizmo. These are phones where kids can text and talk and play games and listen to music, but they're not connected to the internet. And that's where young kids fall into trouble. So they're perfect starter phones for kids. They can still connect with their friends, but they're not going to get into bad stuff because, kids, 16-year-old girls, even 18-year-olds don't get that when you put something out there, creepers can see, anybody can see. First, believe it or not, it bothers kids more for their parents to be on phones than for parents for their kids to be on phones. So the first thing is, when you walk in the door, you got to put your phone down. I mean, you've got to be
as the parent has to set the stage.
As the parent. Parents are terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible.
My daughter calls me a screenager. She calls me a screenager if she's trying to talk to me and I'm on my phone. She goes, "Oh, sorry, screenager. Let me know when you're done." And I'm like,
there you go. Lock it away. Have a lockbox in your, in your kitchen somewhere. Have a thing where it is from 7 to 8 or 8 to 9 or whatever. Everybody's phones get locked, including yours. And, sometimes if you feel like your kid is on, say, social media or playing video games, say 3 hours after school or 4 hours after school, you need to wean your kid from that. And so you need to set time limits. Say, okay, you can use your phone or you can play a video game, after whatever, or after a certain time at night, you can't use your phone. Don't let kids take their phones to their bedrooms. Oh, but I need background music. Oh, but no, because friends call and it keeps kids awake and kids' sleep is so poor. So you can let your kids use them, an hour here, an hour there. Because remember, John, this is fun screen time. I'm not talking about screen time to get their homework done. Yeah. The average kid is on screens, 8 to 9 hours per day. That's a lot. How many times, how often do they talk to you during the day? 40 minutes, maybe. So you need to tip that balance. Maybe. So be more present with your kids, put your phone down, start to limit their access. But when you limit their access, you got to limit your access too. And you got to talk to your kids.
Well, that's
really the rub.
Is that you have to talk to them?
Yes. And you have to let them figure out what to do without a phone in their hand. And you have to figure out how to be with a kid without either one of you having a phone in your hand. But you know what? It's so great. I mean, kids actually like learning how to be off their phone because there's more stimulating stuff going on there. Read a book, play with your sister, your brother, go outside. Once kids get used to spending less time on their phones, they like it. They really do like it, contrary to what we would think. I've had boys addicted to video games upwards of 6, 7, 8 hours a day playing games, and they realize something's wrong, but they can't take control to wind down on it. So once, I helped this kid get, off of his video games on the phone and spend less time on them, he felt so good and thought, why didn't I do this earlier? So don't always think you're being a bad, mean person by getting your kid by limiting the amount of time they can use their phone or play video games. After a while, they're really going to like it and they're going to thank you. Really. I'm not kidding. I promise you.
Yeah. It's interesting. The part about parents, because it is easier to go, okay, well, they're on their phone. Like the parent has to do the work of going, I'm going to be engaged. And if you've got a surly 14-year-old, so here's my question. Is there a period of a teen boy's life where they're super surly and they sometimes use their attitude as a way to try to shut you down. And you as a parent have to like push that aside and still be present. Because I know I'm speaking from experience. I think I was just a punk from like 11 to like 31. And I used my attitude to push people away. Yeah. How as a parent, because there's a parent listening right now that are like, this sounds amazing. I would love to do all this, but my 14-year-old is really sarcastic and knows the meanest ways to make me feel terrible and says comments like, how do I move beyond that? What's my role there?
Yeah. Well, first of all, when you see your kid being really snarky, don't assume it's about you. As parents, what am I doing wrong? Why does he not like me? No. Usually has nothing to do with you. There is a need beneath that and a story that he's telling himself beneath that has nothing to do with you. And most kids during the teen years, they get really snarky, feel rejected by friends. They feel ugly. They feel stupid. They feel, nobody wants to be around them, whatever. Self-esteem of kids during their teen years is terrible. It's terrible. Boys feel rejected by girls. So when your kid is snarky, first, don't take it personally. Second, sort of see past it. Say, I know you're having a bad day, but I just need to talk to you about this. Let the kid know you're on their side. You're not opposing them. Because when your kid comes at you with fangs showing, like, I'm just going to, show you something, Dad, don't bite. Don't bite. Don't get mad back because they're trying to draw you in to overpower you to make you do something you don't want to do. So don't bite. Just say, whoa. I know that you're upset about something, but I need to talk to you about something else. Because when you get baited into fighting back with a kid, you go to your room, you have such a bad attitude, I can't take it. And you start ping-ponging like that, nothing good ever happens. So you need to back out. If the kid is not wanting to talk or they're being too aggressive, don't talk to them about something at that time. Wait until they've calmed down. Bedtime's a wonderful time to talk to your kids about stuff. And so, that's kind of my recommendation is look below the surface. It's not about you, and don't get pulled into an argument and realize that your kid's going to use that to manipulate you, and just refuse to be manipulated. Don't bite back.
That's great
and they'll
advice.
Outgrow it.
Yeah, they'll outgrow it. Yeah, exactly.
Well, one more thing about girls, because I did the father-daughter book. Dads often say, one day my daughter just came downstairs and I went to hug her and she stood there and almost spit at me, like, get away, you creepy person. And so I said, okay. And I went away. And I said, that's the worst thing you can do, because here's what's happening. Your daughter feels so awful about herself. Everything's wrong because they live with this sense that everybody sees them. They're so profoundly egocentric. They think that everybody sees everything that's wrong with them. So they feel bad about themselves. And what do? They spit at Dad. So get away from me, Dad. I know you're like everybody else. Don't take it personally. This isn't about you, Dad. This is about her. And once you recognize it's not about you, then you can sort of gently come back and sort of, we had a daughter we had to put her into a hug training because she went through this, like, stay away. And my husband was like, okay, I'm going to come and give you a hug now. So stand still. Kind of make a game out of it a little bit. But the worst thing you can do is back off and wait till she comes around and she's nice again when she's 18.
That is great advice, and I've seen that in my own house. That's great advice. You mentioned again, strong fathers, strong daughters. You've actually done a movie version, so it's funny to think about. You didn't think you'd write a book, and I'm sure years and years and years ago when you wrote the book, you didn't think, I bet this will be a movie. Tell us about that experience. I mean, what a special thing to get to turn that content. How did that happen? What's the movie like? Why was I not just a cameo? Like, I could have walked behind somebody in the film. I'm just like, I would have promoted like crazy. I got a lot of Twitter followers. No, tell us about the movie, because I think that's amazing.
Well, first of all, they're talking about doing a book, on my mother's son book. And if they do, John, you will be in it. Okay.
Yeah.
I will
Okay.
tell them. They have to put you
It's
in.
on audio now. It's on a podcast.
It's on audio. Here's what happened, and this is just the way your life goes. You all of a sudden find yourself thrown in these situations. You go, how in the world did I get here? How did I get here? Well, after I wrote the book, I was very, very surprised. It just hit all over the world. And I thought, oh, this is good. And I went on and wrote another book and another book. Then what people don't realize is we authors don't own our books. Our publishers do. Mm-hmm. And the same is true for movies. We don't own the movie. The movie people buy the rights to the book, maybe unbeknownst to us, and then they go and make a movie. So a number of years ago, Pureflix contacted my publisher and said, we want to buy the rights to the book. They told me, and I went, okay, that's nice. 4 or 5 years went by. I totally forgot about it. And I got a call from one of the producers, said, we're working on the movie. We're filming. Do you want to come to LA and watch the movie? And tomorrow, do you want to come tomorrow? And I said, sorry, I can't just jump on a plane tomorrow. Anyway, long story short, they involved me in letting me see the screenplay. And even though I don't own it, I was able to weigh in on some things, take this out. No, I don't like that. And then they did it and they made it. And when it came out, which was August 1st, I will tell you, I was so nervous because Pureflix is a Christian Netflix. And this is awful. I thought this is going to be so cheesy.
That's not awful. That's appropriate. We do some sucky stuff. Let's just be honest.
Exactly. Cheesy. Yeah, and I thought my name's on it. My book is in it. And so I thought, if this is bad, I'm in big trouble. My career as an author is over. But, so I turned it on, I watched it, and I was pleasantly surprised. And I actually really like it. It's not cheesy at all. It's a fun, uplifting movie. It's kind of funny. And at the end, it kind of yanks at your heart. But it's a real feel good, not over the top movie. And so I'm really tickled with it. And my book appears in it, everywhere, because his father's having a hard time getting through to his daughters. And this friend comes over and says, if you really want to get through to your daughters, and I gulped, read this book. And there was my book, and which was incredibly humbling because I thought my book is good, but it's not that good. And so it was really fun. I've been very pleased with it. And apparently it's done really well. So
I love that. What a wild experience that must be as an author to see your work turned into something like that. So
it's kind of surreal.
Yeah, it has to be. It's similar to how I feel when I get a foreign edition of a book and I go, somebody in Russia is reading this and it has a lobster on the cover. I don't know why, but that's wild to think the thing you wrote in your little office turns into something. I want to ask a couple more questions around your approach to goals. So you do a million different things. Like you've got a masterclass that's Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. You're a speaker, you're a writer. You're also a doctor in addition. Like it feels like you do a lot of the same things I do, except you're also a doctor, which is not a small also. It's kind of like you're also a rocket scientist and you go to Mars in between speaking engagements. How do you personally approach goals? Like, you seem like you get a lot done. You seem like you've accomplished a number of things that you're passionate about. What's your approach to goals?
Well, first of all, when people talk about a balanced life, they think that I need to be able to do 5 things every single day and feel good about them and balance them. My approach is not that. I'm an all or nothing person. If I'm going to write a book, that's all I do for months and months, as career-wise. I back off on my speaking. I back off on seeing patients in my office. And so I do things more sequentially than all at once. And that's how I find balance in my life. The other thing is I focus on what I'm really good at. I figure out what I'm not good at, and I let other people do that. I don't pull off my life by myself. I have 8 people working for me. I have a very great husband. And that's how I pull off my life, because if I try to do everything all the time, I would just burn out. And so I've learned what I need to make things work. I need exercise 4 or 5 times a week because I go crazy if I don't. I also have really bad untreated ADD, and I lose things all the time, like my purse and computers and things like that, important things. So I've learned that I can't allow my mind to get gummed up with too many things at once. So if I'm working on a project, I'm very, very, very focused on that project, and I say no to a whole lot of things. And saying no for a lot of women who are very compliant and want to be really nice is very hard. But the only way you're going to succeed at your goal is to say no at times to other things. So I really get hyper focused when I need to. And that's a discipline, because my brain doesn't want to do that.
How have you learned to say no? That's an interesting. So what are some things that have helped you get better at saying no over the years?
Well, practice, honestly, practice. And it's still very hard because there's so many worthwhile things that come at me. But if I'm working on something that's very important, I train myself. As soon as somebody asks me to do something, I go, wait a minute. I told myself that I wasn't going to take on more. So I practice saying no, because otherwise, you're going to be writing your book or getting your talk ready or whatever, and pretty soon it's delayed and it's delayed and it's delayed. And so I realize every time I say yes, I'm delaying something that's really important to do. Plus, if you're going to take what you're doing very seriously, like writing a book, it's not fair to that book and to yourself to not say no. But it takes a lot of practice, because it's hard, because you're saying no to very worthwhile things. And there are times I just say, look, you can't exercise now. It's the way it is. You can do it later. But right now you need to focus on blank. So you just have to learn to give things up and realize if they're that good, you can do them later. Pick them up later.
Yeah, I think that's part of the lie, is that we make a lot of things once in a lifetime opportunities that aren't. Like, there's very few. I remember I met a 23-year-old who was like, this job's a once in a lifetime. And I thought, you're going to work for 50 more years. I hope it's not one. Like, you're 23. It would stink to a 23 be like, that was my one shot. Next half a century, just no more opportunities. But we add a lot of pressure, I think, to ourselves that way.
And peers do that. Peers do that. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. So what do you mean by peers do that? Like the people that you surround yourself with?
No. So if you're between 30 and 40, let's say, you have a lot of friends who are between 30 and 40, and probably those friends are trying to establish their careers and so on and so forth. And they're having kids and they're this, and they all share notes and they all talk about what they're trying to do. And so one person who says, I'm going to have kids now and pursue my career in 5 years is going to be less likely to do it if she sees her friend having kids and having a career and exercising, doing all these things all at once. So that's where the pressure comes from. We compare ourselves to what our friends are doing. And what 30-year-olds and even 40-year-olds need to realize is, after your kids are grown and gone, you've got a lot of time to do your stuff. To get really good at what I think Winston Churchill didn't become prime minister until he was 60, I think. But anyway, so spread things out over time. Don't feel like you're living in a pressure cooker to get everything done now just because your friends are.
I think that's really wise. I always joke that part of that stems from, in college, that people will say, oh, you got to go to Europe now. Go now. As if Europe is closed when you're in your 30s or 40s. Like, you can only go when you're 24. Portugal hates 40-year-olds. And where I'm now 46, I'll be 47 soon. Like, you have more money. You understand yourself better. So you do less things that are dumb. You're like, oh, I like restaurants, or I don't like restaurants. I like, I prefer Stockholm over whatever. And you are able to actually do it. So I love that idea of like, you think there's a moment, but the moments are longer. And I think part of that is life is short. We tell ourselves that all the time. 2 last questions, and they're both very easy. First one, we ask everybody that's on the podcast this. What are the 4 books that are on your Mount Rushmore? Like 4 nonfiction books that you love? Or if you want to answer the question this way, because sometimes it's hard to think of 4 on the spot, what's a book you've given away more than any other book other than your own? Because we both, as writers, like we have garages full of books. And like, if somebody makes eye contact with me at the airport, I'm like, here's a copy of my book. What's a book you've given away more than any other, or what's on your Mount Rushmore of nonfiction books that have impacted you?
Well, I tend to read things from colleagues. I'm trying to think. Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster.
Yeah.
I give that away so much because that's my go-to get your life back in order. And I use it next to my Bible, really, of just sort of going through, and it's like, okay, yep, I've got to learn to simplify. Yep, I've got to learn to, listen or, get my prayer life in order. As far as, and I love poetry, I love Emily Dickenson, I love Jane Austen. Those are all fiction, though.
Yeah,
and I love
fun.
the classics. Sure. Yeah, I love the classics. I like The Count of Monte Cristo. I love Victor Hugo's Les Mis. I love Anna Karenina, Brothers Karamazov. I just like things like that because they have depth to them. And I love to read because it takes you into a different world and you can create the characters to look like however you want them to.
It's a power. It's a fun power.
It is power. Yeah, it is a fun power.
I love that. Okay, last question. This one's easy. Where can people find out more about you? More about what you do, your books, your movie, everything. Where can people find out more about Dr. Meg?
Yeah, I would go to, certainly not Wikipedia because they're wrong. I go to meekerparenting.com.
Meekerparenting.com. That's Meeker. You know how to spell the word parenting. Yeah. .com. Awesome. Well, Dr. Meg, it's always so fun to see you. I did your podcast not too long ago, and that's where we reconnected after a couple of years of just barely missing each other at speaking engagements. We are in a lot of the same green rooms, just not on the same day. That's how it is with public speaking.
And I wish we would be, because we really run parallel lives, and that's too bad, because the people that you really connect with are people that are doing very similar things, but unfortunately you don't get to see them. So
yeah, it's fun.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
We geek out at stuff. And I'll tell you, I grew up in Massachusetts. Concord is fancy. Is Concord the one that their zip code is 01776, or is that Sudbury? Because one of those two cities fought for
ours was 01742 is Concord. Now, Concord is fancy now, but back in the day, we had the old school New Englanders who, the more money they had, the harder they tried to hide it. So you'd wear an Oxford shirt with a frayed collar, or you'd never wear makeup, for women, obviously. But it's very different now because there's a lot of wealth that's moved in. And honestly, it would be hard for me to live there. I couldn't afford it anymore. Yeah. It's a bunch of wealthy, hedge fund people in Boston that are building these huge houses. But it is very beautiful. I love the history. I love the history of Concord. So
heard around the world. It's gorgeous. I grew up in Ipswich. Ipswich, Massachusetts, was on the North Shore, Cranes Beach, gorgeous. And then we moved to Hudson, which is near Hudson, Sudbury, Framingham, all that. And then my wife and I lived in Arlington, which is next to Cambridge. So we had a couple different stops. Yeah. I remember, I think it's Sudbury. There were 3 towns that fought over the zip code 01776 because of 1776. And they wanted the pride of that. So Concord must have, I think it was Sudbury that won.
They must have lost. And Patriots Day was a big deal in New England. Oh, yeah. Schools shut down. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And we celebrated the Revolutionary War, and we walked the old, path they did. And I remember it all. It's so funny we had that in common. I didn't realize you were from Concord. What a small world. It's a different culture. It's a completely different culture. First time I moved to the Midwest and I went into a grocery store, I thought, why is everybody talking to each other?
Oh, yeah.
We just, in New England, you just sort of leave people alone. So
no, the cashier at Stop and Shop never asks how your day is. Like he or she just does their job. Like the guy at Papa Gino's doesn't care how your day is. Like he just, and I always so when I went to school in Birmingham, I grew up in Massachusetts, school in Birmingham. I was the same way. I was like, why do people keep asking me how my day is? Like strangers would talk to me and I was real standoffish. I had a really I was very confused at the outgoing nature of strangers in the South. I was kind of like, what's it to you? What's it to you? Like that was my attitude.
Well, and people think we're snobby. It's not that. It's just we're trained to sort of stay to ourselves. It's not like we don't like other people. No. This is just the way we live. Yeah. So it was a jolt to be moving to the Midwest.
Yeah, same with me. I just had the Southern version of that. That's so funny. Well, I'm glad to know I'm not the only one. This is why we could talk for hours. Dr. Meg, I can't wait to share this episode with people. People are going to love it. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for listening to my interview with Dr. Meg Meeker today. We'll put all the links in the show notes as always. And thank you for reviewing my podcast. The reviews you write are super helpful and super encouraging. I've said this a million times before. You get kind of in an echo chamber when you do a podcast because there's not interaction like there is at a live event or in a conversation. And so the reviews are a chance for you to talk back to me, talk with me. And I really appreciate when people take time to do that. So thank you for taking the time to write those. Please make sure you subscribe or follow or whatever it is the kids are saying these days. We'll be back next week, next Monday. And remember, all it takes is a goal. And don't forget to pick up your copy of the Finish Calendar. Brand new, massive, beautiful, double-sided vertically or horizontally, paper or dry erase at finishcalendar.com. Once again, that's finishcalendar.com.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about the All It Takes Is a Goal podcast and to get access to today's show notes and exclusive content from John Acuff, visit acuff.me/podcast. Thanks again for joining us. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the All It Takes Is a Goal podcast.